The second paper is then looking into what happens to graduates when they enter the labour market, and that is from Professor Marita Jakob of the University of Cologne, whose expertise is precisely in this area. And one of the very marvellous things about the very interdisciplinary and very international education and social stratification strand in AQMeN, which organised the conference today, is the bringing together of people who are expert in school education, in higher education, and in the case of Marita, in the progression beyond higher education into the labour market.
So I'm Marita Jakob. I'm coming from the University of Cologne, and I'm presenting you joint research with Christina, who is somewhere lost, and a colleague, Markus Klein, who had been working at the AQMeN project. And the point I want to stress before I begin with my talk is that one of the strengths of the education and social stratification strand, as it is its comparative perspectives. So by comparing country, that gives us the opportunity to look more closely on how institutions that are given in a particular country affect individuals that are born by chance in country A or country B. So we learn something by comparing countries for changing or for getting a deeper understanding how our institutions in our country work. So what I'm going to talk about, I'm continuing in a kind of life perspective what we have heard so far. So far we have talked about inequalities in subject choice, access to higher education, and we just heard a presentation about student success, about retention in higher education. So what I'm going to look at is what happens after graduation. Are there inequalities in the job opportunities of those who actually mastered all these transition and all these stony pathways up to finally getting the certificate? So what I want to ask is, do parents still affect the job opportunities of these very high qualified individuals, of these graduates? And if this is the case, and if this is the case, or if it isn't the case, are there any differences between Germany and the UK, and how can we relate these possible differences to the institutional setup of the educational system and the labor market? So let's think a little bit before we come to the results what the world might look like. So assume for a moment that graduate social origin does not affect graduates' job opportunities. This is an optimistic way of thinking. Why should this be the case? So social origin could have a minor role for labor market outcomes because, in particular for graduates who enter professions or higher occupational positions, this allocation is restricted by occupational certificates only, not taking into account any other characteristics of these applicants. Furthermore, the allocation into the public sector or into large-scale organization is highly formalized. So there are departments in this organization that manage and bureaucratically organize how to recruit persons. So there is no influence beside what is documented in the documents, the certificates. And finally, thinking of the technical progress and economic efficiency, it might be the case that employers can simply not afford to use non-meritocratic, non-performance-based characteristics when they are hiring applicants into their jobs that perform the best. They are looking for the best candidate that can do the task at hand in the best way. So if this is true, social origin has no room to work somehow into the job opportunities of graduates. However, from another point of view, we could also argue that social origin might have an impact. So why could this come about? Well, first, there are different experiences and different educational attainment prior to graduation. So students from different social origin choose different fields of study. We have just seen that they opt for different higher education institutions, the more prestigious one or the less prestigious one. They have got differences in what they do besides their studies. For example, whether or not they have to work to finance their living. So there might be some room for social origin due to these different factors that are that affect the characteristics graduates actually have and the experience they have been making. Furthermore, there are still differences in parental resources that are there, even for graduates. So for some graduates, there are cultural and social resources of the parents facilitating labor market entry, the parents' networks, as an example. Furthermore, there are skills learned in the family of origin, like social skills or soft skills, that might be helpful when having a personalized interview with an employer. And furthermore, another aspect I haven't been talking about is it's not only recruitment into firms, but there could also be way for influences of social origin due to intergenerational inheritance of companies. So they just get the company of the father. So, which of the stories is going to be true? Before we come to which of the stories is going to be true, let's have a look why it is helpful to look at different countries. What are the institutions that shape this process of leaving higher education and entering the labor market? So first, we have to take into account that the educational differ in different countries, and we are going to have to take into account how the labor market structure and regulation and labor market entry, the process of labor market entry, is going to be organized in two countries. I'll come to that point in a minute. So let's have a look at UK and Germany that are different in both respects. They are different with regard to the educational system, and they are different with regard to labor market regulation or organization. First of all, the school system differs. Whereas in the UK, we have got a rather low selectivity of the school system. Well, we now don't take into account what we've heard in the morning about the within-school choices, but overall, it's a more comprehensive system, and it has got less statutory requirements and so on, compared to the German system, where we have got a really strong tracking of students in different school tracks that offer different opportunities to go on. So only those individuals who have attained an Abitur, that is graduation from the gymnasium, are actually entitled to enroll in higher education. And in comparison to UK, we have got a strong vocational training system as an interesting, attractive alternative to enrolling in higher education. So let's have a look at higher education. Whereas in the UK, we have got a diversified system with a lot of different types of universities, of different prestige. In Germany, we have got only two types of universities. So there's a higher tier university and the lower tier, the Fachhochschule. The two systems also differ with regard to higher education expansion. In the UK, we have got a much stronger expansion in terms of participation in higher education compared to Germany. So, what does it mean? It means that due to these different features of the educational system, the degree that graduates possess might be a more reliable indicator, might have a stronger value, stronger signaling of the qualification of the person that has achieved this degree in Germany compared to the UK. The labor market structure is also differently organized, whereas in the UK we have got a more firm-oriented, firm-segmented labor market. In Germany it is occupations that matter, so it's occupation that organizes the labor market. And this in turn has consequences for which jobs do graduates end. So in Germany, for example, as there is a high match between the graduate skills they acquire in higher education and the occupations they later enter, there is a stronger match of these graduates to particular positions. In the UK, there is a less strong link. And these and other features have got consequences for in which jobs graduates finally end. So as the links are stronger in Germany than in the UK, we expect that graduation has a stronger effect on labor market positions. So let's come to the answers of these questions. We use the data from the Reflex Survey, that is a survey of tertiary graduates in 1999 and 2000, and these had been followed 5 years after graduation. So we don't only know the first job they are entering, but we also know the job where they are after 5 years of working experience. The Reflex Survey had been a European-wide survey, but we concentrate on the UK and Germany only, because then we can make really sure that we tackle the question we want to answer. What we are going to look at, we look at access to upper middle class positions. So it's an occupational position we are interested in, a position in the labor market, a hierarchical position. We have got measures for social origin with regard to parental education only. You have heard that now for a number of times in the studies that had been presented already. So what we are looking at is whether or not parents themselves had been graduating at higher education. Furthermore, we take into account the qualitative differences. That's something you have already heard in other presentations as well. So we take into account the type of higher institution, and we take into account whether or not students have studied different fields of study, different fields. So now the interesting part begins. What are the results? First of all, what we see is that the graduation rates in Germany and the UK differ with regard to social origin. Whereas in Germany, we have got only 35% of graduates that are from families where none of the parents has got achieved a degree. In the UK, this rate is much higher. So graduates from low-educated families are simply more frequently found in the UK than in Germany, possibly reflecting the more selective process in the German system before entering higher education. So we have got a broader scope in the UK with regard to who actually graduates from higher education. So where do these students end up? Well, in an upper middle class position, 31% of Germany's graduates are entering the first job, compared to 25% of graduates in the UK. However, 5 years later, that looks a little bit better because now the percentages are similar, with 1/3 in Germany and almost 1/3 in the UK. So, although UK graduates receive an upper middle class occupation less frequently in the first job than Germany's graduates, they catch up 5 years later. So there seems to be a longer process of getting into a higher job. So with regard to social origins, what do we see? What you see here are the differences in attaining such an upper middle class occupation, comparing UK and Germany. UK is the light blue bar, Germany is the dark blue bar. And what you see is the difference between graduates with both parents having obtained a degree compared to graduates with parents with no degree, no parent with a degree. So the chances or the difference to end up in an upper middle class occupation in the UK is stronger than in Germany. So the social gap is stronger in the UK than in Germany. However, if we take into account higher education institution and the field of study, the social gap is reduced, but it is reduced much stronger in Germany. There is still a remarkable gap in the UK. However, in Germany, the gap is almost disappearing if we take into account that students from different classes have studied at different universities and have attained a different degree with regard to field of study. That means that the effect of parental education is much stronger in the UK, and it's not only much stronger in the UK, but it also persists after controlling for these possible qualitative differences between graduates. That had been the job right after having graduated. Let's look 5 years later in the early career. There still is a social gap. However, again, this gap reduces once we take into account higher education institution and field of study. But what we see is, again, the social gap remains in the UK, whereas it completely disappears in Germany. So there is some influence of social origin in the UK in the first job, and this influence of social origin also goes on up to 5 years after graduation, at least in the UK. It's not existent anymore in Germany. So what have we seen? We have seen that social origin matters more in the UK than in Germany. Part of this social origin gap can be explained by field of study. However, this is more so the case in Germany than in the UK. And in the UK, a significant effect of social origin remains after taking into account these qualitative differences among graduates. A good thing is that these social inequalities become smaller across the early career. It could have been the case that they even diverge in the later career, but at least they are not going stronger, but there is a convergence, at least small convergence across the early career. So, what do we learn from this? Is Germany actually really more meritocratic than the UK? Well, if we have a broader look at the more general literature, we see that Germany is less socially mobile than other countries. So we do have a strong reproduction of social inequalities between generations. However, the mechanism for the reproduction of social inequalities differ. It's not at graduates' labor market entry when Germany's parents come into play. So they are much more important prior to graduation. So in Germany, with regard to graduates, these inequalities are transmitted via the educational attainment. Not everybody graduates in Germany. It's just a small fraction due to the selectivity of the system. And there are the qualitative differences that contribute to social origin differences. Whereas in the UK, inequality is only partly transmitted via education and qualitative differences. So there is a more direct influence of social origin on labor market entry and early career of graduates. So let's end with some policy implication. Well, people who think that just expanding attendance in higher education might reduce social inequalities, well, for them I have got not a good message, because promoting higher education expansion only may not be enough to reduce social inequalities if there is an effect of social origin after graduation. So it's just a postponement of these social inequalities. However, the German case shows that establishing stronger links between the higher education sector and the labor market may improve this equality of outcomes. So, reducing the role of social origin in labor market outcomes. So, thank you.
Thanks very much. I think we have time on this occasion for 2 or 3 questions before we move into the next phase of discussion. So questions to either of the 2 speakers, Gatit or Marita. Yeah, one just up there.
Hi, I wondered about the role of financial differences as a sort of possible hypothesis. For example, a lot of young people here might say they're concentrating on their degree. Typical upper middle class child would concentrate on getting a good degree, come home, be looked after by their parents for the next year whilst they do internships, which may be unpaid. And that's a way there's a direct financial support by the more privileged, which might contribute to the gap. I don't know how that might play out in Germany. For you.
For me. You had been asking to whether or not the financial situation of students and graduates differ. Well, what we see is that student employment affects their chances to graduate. I'm not sure if you have examined that, but I have examined that in another study. And what we see is that employment contributes to the social differences, because working class, let's call them, for simplicity, just working class students from less educated families have to work more. They are much stronger harmed in their progress, and that has got some effect on the labor market position. So it's a more indirect relevance of social origin. But having said this, student employment to improve their own financial situation doesn't have only a negative impact, because what we see is that there are some jobs that really contribute to the qualification and skills that students acquire, and these in turn are rather helpful for labor market entry. And it is an open question how far students from less privileged backgrounds more often have to work as waiters in less valuable jobs, whereas students from better off backgrounds could afford to work in higher qualificational jobs. But this had not been part of this research, but we try to at least control statistically for this financial burden students have to face. I'm not sure if it really answers your question.
Thank you. Any more questions just now? Yes, just one down there.
I've got a question about, it's a bit of a perverse question about the long-term sociological impact. If the German system's effective in social mobility of the talented young people, does it create any sinkholes for talent within the most deprived neighbourhoods? And is it something we need to think about mitigating against should our plans be successful?
I would say these are two sides of a coin. By being very selective in higher education entrance, so there's only a small fraction that is entitled to enroll, we do have a high fraction that isn't even allowed to enroll in higher education. So we do have a rather selective, homogeneous group of graduates, and that could be the reason why we do not observe any further differences after graduation. And the sinkhole you have hinting at are the ones that get lost on the way. Is it?
Well, it's more that in the most deprived neighbourhoods, potentially the most talented people leave and don't come back.
I don't know. I don't know whether or not this is locally or different in neighbourhoods. I don't know.
Thank you. Okay, let's move in then to the next phase of discussion. Exactly the same.